Welcome. My name is Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker Smith, and I'm the Senior Associate for Pan African and Orthodox Faith Engagement at Bread for the World in Washington, D.C. I also serve with the Advocacy Network for Africa, AdNA, as convener of the Pan African Working Group. We are here in partnership with the Advocacy Program Manager with the Torture, Abolition, and Survivor Support Coalition and the African and Diaspora Manchester Conference. We welcome you together to this timely discussion. The theme for this webinar is U.S. Africa Policy Recommendations in a Time of Crises and Opportunity. We begin with a brief moment of silence in memory of the lives that have succumbed to COVID-19 and loss of life anywhere. Let us take a moment for silence. In your mercies, amen and ashe. Today, U.S. Africa policy stands at a crossroads of crises and opportunity that reflects the challenges both in the United States and the nation states of Africa. Global climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, assaults on democracy and its related institutions and processes, security, and global economic inequities rooted in a history of colonialism, structures, systems, policies, and practices grounded and shaped with a racial bias that has thwarted the voice and full participation of Africans and people of African descent. The Pan-African Working Group and the drafting team of the U.S. Africa Policy Recommendations shared today, both related to the Advocacy for Africa Network, AdNA, recognizes challenges like these, but also sees opportunities. In other words, we see opportunities for finding solutions. Together, we see a horizon that can seize the opportunity for old, renewed, and new proposals, especially for the new Biden-Harris presidential administration and the legislative branches of U.S. governance. We see a horizon of bipartisanship that will not only benefit Africa and the African diaspora, but in so doing, for all of us. The good news is there is history to build on for this renewed season of opportunity. Bipartisanship support for policies like PEPFAR that has and still is systematically addressing HIV/AIDS, the Ebola crisis that not only was addressed with regard for U.S. solidarity with African nation states and not for African nation states, has helped build capacity for strategies and products of resilience, even over this past year regarding the pandemic of COVID-19. Bipartisan interests of the U.S. and Africa nation states and its African Union to create processes and regulations that reconstruct methods of equitable trade and industry regarding the African Union's 2063 plan and the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The partnership of Africa and her diaspora over generations in the US and globally also presents new opportunities of and for addressing US-Africa policies and relations. This includes affirming and recognizing the importance of remittances from the African diaspora to Africa. This, in addition to the decisive role that the Africa diaspora played in the election of the new US presidential team and legislative branches of government, and in prior elections. The globalization of Black Lives Matter and the embrace of African leaders to insist on hearing about the crimes against Black lives in the US at the United Nations. The Pan-African lens that Vice President Harris brings from her upbringing as a daughter of Jamaican and South Indian parentage and their tutelage of her to appreciate holidays like Kwanzaa. The strategic recognition of the sixth region, the African diaspora, in the African Union's 2063 vision. In sum, Pan-African engagement and its lens matters when it addresses US-Africa policy, an approach of mutuality and partnership. This morning, AdNA, in partnership with AAD and TASSC, are pleased to share the recommendations of the AdNA paper presented to the Biden-Harris transition team. The paper is entitled Recommendations for U.S. Africa Policy for the Biden-Harris Administration, and we will hear more about that as we move along. We are especially delighted that representatives of the actual drafting team are a part of this webinar. They are experts in their own fields of work concerning the issues addressed in the paper and have come prepared to share up to a maximum of about 5 minutes each the section of recommendations their team contributed. Our agenda is designed to give inputs about U.S. transition of power with emerging and demographic shifts concerning democracy and human rights, contributions from the representatives of the writing teams, a response from one of the leading U.S. Africa policy experts, Ms. Imani Kantas, regarding insights about the Biden-Harris administration. And we will invite a Q&A section in the latter part of our time together. We invite you to use the Q&A tool to share your questions and observations throughout. We will be monitoring the Q&A so that when we get to the Q&A section, we can observe inquiry at that time. Please note that the agenda is also in the chat for your convenience. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Adotei Akwei, who is an executive with Amnesty International. We would like to bring him on to share his insights around U.S. transition of power. Mr. Akwei is also the Deputy Director of Advocacy and Government Relations at Amnesty International. He will also come and share out his views on the context to which we speak relative to the recommendations. Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to a fruitful time together. Mr. Adotei, please.
Thank you very much, Angelique, and welcome everybody. Of course, we all know that 5 to 10 minutes is only going to be enough to sort of touch on a number of issues and not be the whole comprehensive set of recommendations that AdNA has developed. So we're hoping that this will be part of an ongoing discussion that happens, and we will be a part of it. I think everybody knows that November of 2020 saw the election of the Biden and Harris administration, and there were significant ripple effects that will come from that change and transition in the executive. I'm going to touch very briefly on a couple of them that impact the U.S.-Africa relationship, which is our focus, and also talk a little bit about the changing dynamics here in the diaspora, the African diaspora here in the United States. The first one, of course, is the Biden-Harris election signals a return to multilateralism, and this has been noted by both the president, the vice president, and by the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. What this means is that the United States sees its role again as being an engager, an enabler of inclusion, and also of playing a leadership role in the world order that arose after the Second World War. And that is going to have significant implications for how the African Union is pulled in, how the UN structures are supported, and more importantly, how democracy and fundamental rights feature in US foreign policy. We expect to see democracy, promotion, and human rights become return to being central foreign policy pillars. Those have been already articulated again, not only by the nominees for Secretary of State, but also by Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's going to be the ambassador to the United Nations, as well as by the president and vice president also. The administration is also making a real sort of path forward in terms of appointing people who are also committed to those things. And a large number of them have experience with Africa. And that's going to be significant in terms of how the administration turns to Africa and builds on President Biden's statements of engaging with the continent respectfully, but in a much more robust way. And we're hoping that these recommendations will help shape that so that that engagement is inclusive, it promotes democracy, it promotes human rights, and it also strengthens African civil society and African public capacity to also shape their governance and decision-making. At the same time as the changes have happened in the political leadership here in the United States, there have also been shifts in the African diaspora. For one thing, it is more increasingly youth-led. And I think this has been as a result of an unprecedented year of activism, which built on 4 years of activism around racial justice issues here in the United States. That diaspora has been involved much, much more assertively in trying to shape US policy, either through the executive branch or through Congress. We have had diaspora from Cameroon, Sudan, Ethiopia, just to name a few, who have not only been involved in protest and marches, but also have been involved in lobbying and engaging with elected officials to try to shape how the US engages with crises in those countries or opportunities in those countries. That diaspora is not going to go away and is probably going to be even more empowered with a more receptive executive branch now, and of course, a new Congress that is going to be looking at a new agenda. That diaspora is also much, much better connected and more mobilized to address issues that impact persons of color, and to make the links between the social justice struggles here in the United States as well with those that are taking part on the continent. And one example of that is police reform. Many people saw the Black Lives Matter campaign here in the United States, and also were engaged in the End SARS movement in Nigeria. Those kinds of connections are going to continue because those kinds of aspirations need to be met, and both the administration as well as Congress are going to feel that diaspora pressure, and I think that's going to be extremely important. So we are hoping and looking for a much more robust engagement with the continent, and one that is on a level of more respect, but also still committed to fundamental rights and democratic governance. And we're hoping that the nominee eventually for the Assistant Secretary of Africa position, which is the lead diplomat for the United States to the continent, will sort of be, will embody or be committed to those kinds of principles. But we certainly tend to expect to engage with that, and also expect the diaspora to sort of put pressure on those individuals. I think I'm going to now turn to the recommendations that the working groups that worked on democracy and human rights have developed. And again, the limited time here will not allow me to cover all of them, but I've tried to pull some of the priorities. One of them is, of course, at the congressional level, the increasing of the international affairs budget, which funds democracy, human rights programs, civil society, capacity building programs. It is one of the critical platforms through which US assistance flows to the continent. And we're calling for that to be restored to, at a minimum, 2016 levels, but we would like to see that increased even further. We're calling on the administration to really be the human rights advocate that we expect and that we need it to be, which means supporting freedom of expression, access to information, opposing blanket internet blackouts, and also supporting civil society and civic space. We're calling on the administration to publicly, diplomatically, and politically condemn torture and other abuses that are committed by security forces or other armed groups, and to enforce the US laws that prevent the US security assistance from going to military units that are linked with human rights abuses, such as the Leahy Law. We're also calling for the United States to rejoin the Arms Trade Treaty and to help enforce the Arms Trade Treaty. We're calling on the Biden administration to return to promoting democratic governance. This would include working with civil society organizations in the United States and in Africa to underscore the importance of good governance and to oppose the spread of violence, particularly before, during, and immediately after elections, and to really try to encourage the collaboration between the State Department and AID and African governments and African civil societies. We're calling on the administration to reverse the executive orders targeting the International Criminal Court, which includes lifting the sanctions against International Criminal Court staff, and to instruct US agencies to once again cooperate and support the efforts of the ICC when and where possible. And we're also calling for the Biden administration to issue clear, direct responses to the violence against women and girls shadow pandemic that has emerged as a result of the COVID crisis. We're hoping that we'll have a discussion after this, and I will be very happy to answer more questions or to elaborate on some of these recommendations. And I will turn it back over to you, Angelique.
And thank you so much, Adotei, for that wonderful introduction of the context and the issues around the issues of democracy, human rights. We would like to now move to our next section of our time together. Again, we want to refer you to the chat so that you can follow along with the agenda. It is my pleasure now to introduce Mr. Mark Harrison. Mr. Mark Harrison is the convener/editor of the writing team for the recommendations that are being presented. He also is the director of the Peace with Justice Program Special Assistant to the General Secretary of the United Methodist Church. We are delighted that he can be with us, and we are grateful to him in the role that he played in bringing these recommendations to us. So over to you, Mr. Harrison. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique, for leading us today, and I express appreciation to everyone who's on the call. You heard Adotei go through the recommendations that were on democracy. I just want to give you an understanding, sort of understanding how we came together to do recommendations. I want to say that I was really moved by how African governments responded to the murder of the brother in Minnesota and the knee on the neck, and how African governments took that issue to the United Nations and the Human Rights Council. Unfortunately, in this country, Africa does not get the press that it deserves. So many African Americans did not know that. So many times I find myself telling them the role that Africa played in speaking out against the death of George Floyd. When we have presidential elections in this country, there, as many of you know, foreign policies get discussed, but many times Africa doesn't get discussed. So what we wanted to do was to raise up Africa as a foreign policy priority for the United States. We want the United States to become a good partner with Africa. So the teams, through AdNA, we decided to do a recommendations on US-Africa policy to the Biden-Harris administration. This is not unusual. Many groups do this. And for AdNA, it was the first time that we've done this. So I've appreciated it. The teams, we worked together in teams. We did not have just individuals writing sections. So again, I want to express appreciation to those teams, and you're going to hear the leaders of the teams as they make their presentations. I want to end also with, I want to like to see this as Black Lives Matter beyond the US border, all right? So I'll turn it over to the other contributors to the recommendations to the Biden-Harris team.
Thank you very much, Mark, for those opening remarks around the overview concerning the recommendations that are now coming. Well, as you can see in your agenda, we are now wanting to move to the actual contributors who worked with Mark on putting together this paper that is before us. We will start with Ms. Emira Woods, who is the Senior Advisor to SHINE. SHINE is a growing community of foundations, faith-based groups, and NGOs dedicated to catalyzing investment and access to safe, clean, reliable, and affordable energy for all. She will come to us on the section on climate justice. Welcome, Ms. Woods.
Thank you. It's an honor to be part of AdNA and part of the team that pulled this work together. I want to say also welcome to everyone who's carved out time to participate with us today, either on Zoom or on Facebook. It's an honor to have you all here. The work is just beginning. So as Adotei said, this is kicking off a set of recommendations that we hope will be an ongoing series of conversations. So the section on climate, again, it was a team that prepared it. It was driven by a belief, as we all know, that the time is against us. As the UN so well said, we now have 9 years remaining for the planet to avoid the worst catastrophes from climate change. So the clock is ticking, and we've got a lot of work to do. And for us as Africanists, as Pan-Africanists, we recognize that Africa is particularly vulnerable to climate change. We know the immediate dangers. It's not 9 years away, it's now. The extreme weather conditions of the droughts, the flooding. We see before us this week, yet another horrific cyclone in Mozambique. There's the increased desertification. The list is long. The time is short today, so we won't go into all the detail, but we hold up the beautiful words of Nimo Basi, the environmentalist from Nigeria, who says that, in fact, we are cooking a continent. And we need to do all that we can to prevent the further cooking of the continent. And we also recognize that the greenhouse gas emissions outside of Africa are greater causal factors. And it is at a core, the natural resource fossil fuel extraction that is the source of this greenhouse gas emissions. So we welcome the announcements. Just yesterday was amazing to have a climate day at the White House. Hooray, right? Already kicking off through executive orders and through a series of announcements yesterday, commitments to re-engaging the world through the Paris Agreement, to a climate summit in April. All of that we welcome. But what we understand is that the Paris Agreement does not go far enough. There is so much more to be done. US is the largest emitter of greenhouse gas in the world, and there must be a dramatic mitigation of emissions in order to really avert the crisis that's to come. So we urge the Biden-Harris administration to seize the opportunity to place climate justice at the center of US-Africa policy. And our recommendations are many. I'll just go through a few just in the interest of time. First is to ensure that all US development finance agencies, the AID, US International Development Finance Corporations, all US bilateral aid ends financing of fossil fuel extraction in Africa, leading to a complete phase out of oil, gas, and coal financing through bilateral assistance, trade promotion, and export finance. So that's the divest side that we in the Pan-African community know well, but there must also be an invest side. And we urge, our recommendation number 2 is an investment in what amounts to a Green New Deal for Africa, supporting job creation with the goal of building a zero carbon economy, a zero carbon global economy. Third, ensure that both US trade and investment policy support Africa's shift to a renewable energy future where clean energy is available and affordable for all. We see energy as a right, and this right must be acknowledged in all trade and investment policy. There must also be efforts to incentivize the creation of technologies that will further reduce greenhouse gas emissions on the continent and throughout the world. Fourth, support and invest in Africa's smallholder farmers with special regard for women, local food producers who are the core of building healthy, resilient, climate resilient communities. It is support to those at community level that will be the source of the recovery, a green recovery for the world. Next, there are many issues around the so-called green revolution. Our recommendation is for fossil fuel infused fertilizer dependent genetically modified agriculture to be replaced by ecologically sound, locally sourced, traditionally healthy food production. That's a core in terms of building healthy, resilient futures. Sixth, in the run-up to the COP26 hosted by the UK, we know that the global commitment must fall far below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Anything short of that will continue to cook a continent, pushing Africa further to the brink of climate catastrophe. We urge that recovery plans for COVID and prioritize women, marginalized communities, and young people with radically reductions in carbon. This is our opportunity to address multiple crises, from climate to inequality to COVID. It is possible through a green recovery. We also urge that climate migrants have the opportunity to seek refuge, and that the US, through US policy, support African governments and the United Nations to meet the needs of climate-induced displaced peoples and their communities. So it's about resiliency. It's about resiliency for communities. It's about resiliency for human life. We urge also robust funding for international disaster and domestic programs that equip the climate to avert further crises. So we are out of time, but we just urge continued engagement in these issues, and we look forward to staying connected as we advance pressure on this new government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emira. And I'm sure climate justice, climate change is on the minds of all of us, as Emira has already said, because we heard it already from the White House, even on yesterday. Let us go now to Mr. Nii Akuetteh, he is an independent Africa policy expert with many years of experience working with NGOs and other networks. He also serves as the convener of the AdNA Security Working Group. So we welcome Nii to this conversation. We understand you are joining by phone, so you will not be able to see him visually, but you will be able to hear his voice. Nii, you are on. Thank you. Nii, are you there? It seems
Can
to
you
be
hear me now?
Now we can hear me. Yes, yes, we're ready for your 5-minute presentation. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I was listening very closely to my previous colleagues, Adotei, Mark, and Emira, and of course you, Angelique. I want to add my thanks to you and to the entire AdNA groups and the drafters and those who are making this happen. I'm particularly grateful for the help in being able to join by phone because of my special technical difficulties. The Security Working Group, we actually have a standing Security Working Group, and then we all participated in coming up with our security recommendations to the Biden group, and then all AdNA weighed in on it. So, as has been said, we have only a few minutes. I won't be able to run through all our recommendations. So, of course, I encourage, as others have said, please read the whole thing. And based on what you hear here, you can pass on questions. I have been listening right from the beginning. So if there are questions on security and they are passed on to me, I'll hop back in and answer them. With that, I just want to boil down our recommendations in 5 points. The first point, and others have raised this, is for us looking at security relations between the U.S. and Africa, we think you have to understand why the U.S. security relations to Africa, how the U.S. should look at it. And it is driven by, in our preamble, you will see 2 ideas there. One is that Black Lives Matter. The other one, and they overlap, but they are separate. The other one is that people of African descent have been in this country for 400 years and counting. They built this country physically, they built it economically, and for me, most impressively, they are the ones who've been expanding democracy in this country. Let me repeat, for 400 years. So that implies that the United States and everybody who is a citizen and lives in it has to look at the people of African descent and the African continent in a special way. And that means they owe African Americans and therefore they owe Africa. U.S. security relations need to recognize that. With that, the technical term that we are using for what kind of security relations the U.S. should have with Africa, you will see in the recommendation on the agenda, it's called Advancing Human Security. Basically, I can tell you as a sort of part-time professor, this is a technical term. Its real meaning means that you cannot accomplish security in any place, including in Africa, if you are just narrowly focused on what we call core security, where you are looking at the police and intelligence and just the soldiers. No, and actually this discussion today, if you look at the program, you've heard Adotei talk about democracy, Emira talk about the environment. These are all impact security. Undemocratic governments make their citizens unsecure. If the environment is terrible, people are not secure. We will hear about economic development. We will hear about health. So the point from the security working group is you have to enlarge security to look at how these other issues all impact the security of Africa and of any given African country. But given that we have my colleagues who are going to dive into those issues and have already dived into two, we focus on some of the issues that are purely basic or core security. And so that is what human security means. Another word for it will be expanded security. So if we drill into core security, there is the animal that everybody knows about called AFRICOM, the United States Africa Command, which is the military arm of the Pentagon that focuses on all African countries except Egypt. We are asking that a thorough review should be done on AFRICOM. It was stood up, it was ordered in 2007 by President Bush. It has not been reviewed. There are many people convinced that it's doing the wrong thing. We want a thorough review, and therefore, based on the review, we then go look at what needs to happen to AFRICOM, because the way they've been operating, nobody is happy with them. But it should be based on a thorough professional review, top down, to look at what the facts are and what they have done. The next point, and I have just two other quick points more. Adotei mentioned policing. This is absolutely true. The citizens of every country in Africa are being subjected to either brutal police or bad policing. And those things need to be police professionalism in Africa needs to be improved greatly. But we are saying that the U.S., given George Floyd and the long history of police brutality, police in the U.S. starting with slave patrols, the U.S. is in no position to say, copy our model of policing. But the U.S. must give moral and financial support for the UN and especially the African Union to help Africans build better police. And finally, and again, Adotei hinted at this, you know, there is an African proverb: if you want to go quick and fast, go alone. If you want to go far and sustainably, go with others. And for us, that's another meaning, that's a meaning of multilateralism. We recommend that the U.S. should help build and support African society through a multilateral approach, and that means through the United Nations. The U.S. has a lot, the United Nations has a lot of peacekeepers in troubled African sports. So we endorse that. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. And Angelique, thank you again. Thanks to everybody again. I hope that I did not go over my time too much.
Nee, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you for seeking to stay within our time constraints. We appreciate that very much. Now it's time to move to our next speaker, who will speak to us on the issues of refugees, migration, asylum, and immigration. We welcome Ms. Andrea Barron. She is the Advocacy Program Manager at the Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition, TASSC, which is also working in partnership for this webinar. TASSC is based in Washington, D.C., and she's been a member of the working group on these issues. So we welcome you, Andrea, to this time together. Thank you, Ms. Barron.
Okay. Thank you very much, Angelique. So I'm going to be speaking about refugees, migration, asylum, and immigration and how they relate to Africans on the continent and to Africans here in the United States. So according to the UN Refugee Agency, there are over 74 million refugees, asylum seekers, and displaced people in the world. More than 40% of them are in Africa alone. It's well known that the Trump administration tried to destroy the US refugee resettlement program. So we are excited that the new Biden administration plans to admit 125,000 refugees in fiscal year 2022. We hope that thousands of African refugees will be able to rebuild their lives here and contribute to our country. In Africa, the major drivers of displacement are armed conflict, climate change, and repressive governments. Our first recommendation is that we encourage the new administration to help reduce the number of refugees who flee their country and who are displaced inside their country by cutting foreign assistance to governments that persecute their own people. Rather than just saying they are, quote, troubled or, quote, concerned about gross human rights abuses, the State Department and Congress should tell these governments that US aid will be slashed if they do not quickly change their behavior. The second issue I want to speak about is asylum. Refugees are approved to enter the United States when they are outside the US. Asylum seekers are already here. Those who enter the US legally with a visa are called affirmative asylum seekers. They are seeking protection here because they have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group like the LGBT community. African torture survivors come from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Cameroon, Guinea, Uganda, Sudan, and many other countries. Most of them were persecuted because of their political opinion. They may have participated in a peaceful demonstration against the government, published an article criticizing the dictator of their country. Maybe they were a police officer who refused their commander's order to shoot peaceful demonstrators. The immigration bill that President Biden sent to Congress makes many great proposals, like providing a path to citizenship for 11 million undocumented individuals. But it fails to address a hidden asylum crisis in our country, one that is not always so visible. Tens of thousands of African torture survivors and other affirmative asylum seekers have been waiting 4, 5, and even 6 years to be interviewed by an asylum officer. This is because the asylum office has a backlog of over 370,000 cases. We don't hear as much about affirmative asylum seekers because, understandably, the focus of Congress and the Biden administration has been on migrants who are being detained by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, under terrible conditions. But we need to pay more attention to these affirmative asylum seekers, including torture survivors. The long wait for an interview has re-traumatized many survivors. They are terrified they could be sent back to their country and be tortured again or even killed. And they have suffered because of the long separation from their families back home. Some have even become suicidal. There's an easy solution to this problem, which we hope the Biden administration and Congress will pay attention to. We need more asylum officers immediately to reduce this backlog. The Biden administration and Congress should immediately assign a designated number of asylum officers to interview exclusively affirmative asylum seekers. Those are the ones who enter the United States legally with a visa. With additional funding, even more asylum officers can be hired and the backlog can be reduced faster. Finally, our third recommendation. On Tuesday, President Biden ordered the Department of Justice to phase out private prisons, which is great. But now Biden should take the next step and phase out contracts that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, has with private companies. Many migrants, including people from Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Eritrea, and Nigeria, who have not committed any crime, are being held in immigration detention, which are really like prisons. I've been to many of them. And many of them are run by private companies that are making enormous amounts of money. Nobody should make money by keeping people in detention or prison. So we hope our third recommendation that President Biden and Congress will decide to phase out contracts with private companies keeping people in detention. Thank you.
And thank you very much. We appreciate the recommendations. And now we would like to move to Dr. Pauline Muchina, who's going to bring to us her perspectives from the working group on health, COVID-19, support sustainable and equitable health care across Africa. She is the convener of the COVID-19 AdNA working group, and she also is the advocacy, education, and policy coordinator for Africa at the American Friends Service Committee, which is based in Washington, D.C. We're glad to welcome you, Dr. Muchina. Please bring to us your recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's a new day in America and we can breathe easy. And we thank God for that. As someone who works in a peace building organization, I want to assert that achieving good health for the people of Africa is a critical foundation for a peaceful and economic sustainable Africa. Healthcare infrastructure in African countries face huge challenges such as systemic neglect, inadequate funding, extreme shortage of skilled healthcare workers, lack of locally produced medicines and vaccines, and medical equipment. Therefore, it is vital to increase creative investments in critical health infrastructure. AdNA has 22 recommendations related to health, but don't worry, I will summarize it for you. The first one is we urge the Biden-Harris administration to support sustainable and equitable healthcare across Africa. First, I want to say congratulations to the administration for rejoining the World Health Organization. Woohoo! And now we have to find a way to prevent organizations such as World Health Organization from the political chopping board. Second, we support we ask the Biden administration to support African governments to build adequate, well-equipped and modern health facilities and to invest in training and programs to retain healthcare workers, epidemiologists, and health specialists. Also to support African governments to protect healthcare workers and provide healthcare and hazard pay to healthcare workers, especially those at the front line of the coronavirus. This has been made very clear by the coronavirus. We also ask that the Biden-Harris administration support regional structures and regional organizations such as Africa CDC and individual health research institutes, such as the University of Pretoria in South Africa, which just discovered new treatment for malaria. We also ask that they support African governments in generating innovative health research that include providing funding to build infrastructure for local production of health and pharmaceuticals and medical supplies medical supplies such as disease testing kits, PPEs, and all other medical machines. We ask them to launch a presidential level whole of government global pandemic initiative to support countries in Africa and other countries around the world, to fight today's pandemic such as COVID, HIV, Ebola, while preparing for the pandemic of the future, including those driven by climate change. Support African governments to invest in sexual and reproductive health services to reduce maternal and child mortality, as well as prevent gender-based violence. Provide financial and technical support to COVID vaccine global access, COVAX, to ensure equitable, just, safe, and efficient distribution of COVID-19 and non-COVID-19 vaccines to African countries, and require companies that receive US funding to pull intellectual property and provide technology transfer so that production can occur in the continent of Africa. Currently, pharmaceutical companies are selling 1 dose of vaccine at a higher cost to African countries than European countries. For example, AstraZeneca vaccine sold in Europe for $2.40 are sold at $5.25 in South Africa and $7.70. This is unacceptable. Make vaccine available to all globally. The authorization of new issuance of special drawing rights at the International Monetary Fund should be a priority for this administration. The US needs to show leadership and compassion by allowing new SDRs. African countries and other low and middle income countries need these resources to save lives. I thank the team that helped to develop this portion. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Pauline. All of these recommendations are substantive and so helpful in this time. So thank you for being a part of the team of contributors, you and your team.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. We now want to move to Aldo Calaveri. He has come and he will be joining us around the discussions. We would like to welcome him to speak about the issues relative to, oh, just one moment, please. Sorry, I had a technical challenge there for a moment. Yes, we will have him come and speak to us around the issues, around the recommendations. And I'm, for some reason, not finding what I would like here. Aldo, we would like for you to speak to the issues that you have been addressing to the for the conversation. Can you bring on your recommendations? You're coming to us from Jubilee USA. So welcome, Mr. Calaveri. We're glad to welcome you.
Economic justice.
Economic justice. I knew economic justice.
Economic development.
Yes, economic justice. Thank you. Sorry for that. I had a tech problem here. Thank you so much. Economic justice. Please
Thank you.
Join us.
It's a pleasure to be here. It's a section on inclusive economic development. And we have recommendations there on debt and illicit financial flows, and private sector, trade, and a number of other issues. I will start with the debt because that is so critical at this moment. They are calling for an extension of the G20 common framework on debt relief to the African countries, including middle-income countries, and finding a way to compel the involvement of private sector creditors. And also address an issue that may come up even for countries, African countries that benefit from debt restructuring under this framework. They may face lawsuits from what we call predatory creditors. This has happened in the past to other countries. Even they obtain debt relief from a number of creditors. Other creditors go to the court and sue still for the full amount of their credits. And these actions could also be stopped by reforms of New York laws that govern a large portion of international debt instruments. And there is even action that could be done by executive order to stop this sort of behavior. There are precedents for that. It was done for the Iraq creditors back in 2002. I was listening just to the last presenter also, so I think the issue of special drawing rights has been addressed, but this is something also very important. This is a kind of global reserve asset that the IMF can issue. It is rapid, it's non-debt creating source of funds. It's free of cost to US taxpayers. And we are asking for a new allocation of 3 trillion of this emergency currency, which could immediately deliver about 150 billion to African countries. You wonder why such a small portion, and it's because of how special drawing rights are distributed to IMF members. But it's still significant for African countries if we could get that full allocation of 3 trillion total special drawing rights. Now, another set of recommendations refers to taxation and curbing illicit financial flows. We believe that African countries should be able to exit the dependence from external resources, but this requires addressing the barriers they face to raise domestic revenue. The developing world loses an estimated $1 trillion a year to illicit financial flows, and these leakages could stop if we accelerate agreements to track, measure, and curb illicit financial flows from crime, corruption, and tax evasion and avoidance. And some measures the US could implement could build upon the foundation of the Corporate Transparency Act, which is a legislation Congress just passed a few weeks ago. It became law. The US could promote transparency initiatives and develop beneficial ownership public registries, which help identify criminals, kleptocrats, and shell companies used to launder money. Supporting the enforcement of the Dodd-Frank Act, Section 1504, which requires oil mining and gas companies to disclose on a project-by-project basis the payments to governments. And it has proved hard to implement so far this regulation, but it's action that could again be taken. The administration could take to speed up and strengthen its implementation. Lead international efforts to address Africa taxation rights, support African efforts to develop the policy systems and infrastructure required to end resource theft originated through corruption and tax abuse. We also have a set of recommendations on supporting essential services and ending austerity. This is also, again, in light of the pandemic, an important issue because the pandemic revealed these weaknesses created by years of underinvestment in public services. And the US government should, we say, put an end to austerity programs and embrace more social service-oriented economies. And it could, for this purpose, utilize its leverage within international financial institutions and strengthen the building blocks of healthy societies, assisting African governments to prioritize universal access to health, education, and other services. Another focus is on the African efforts to regulate economies. We recommend the adoption of public-private partnership standards and regulations that safeguard transparency, accountability, governance, the fair allocation of risks and rewards, and social, ecological, and labor standards in these instruments, in public-private partnerships. Then on trade, aligning the US trade policy with the African Union's Agenda 2063, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals. This requires, in our view, supporting the regional trade agreements embodied in the regional trade agenda embodied in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, as opposed to the bilateral agreements that have been present in past US trade policy. And when it comes to renewing the African Growth and Opportunity Act, we believe it should be done in consultation with African governments and other stakeholders. And finally, last but not least, building inclusive and green economies. We believe this requires a future that moves away from fossil fuel-driven exports and replacing them with clean energy and with other types of manufacturing jobs. And the COVID recovery provides opportunities for promoting production manufacturing capacities, sustainable ways to add value to Africa's resources, and the promotion of more just and equitable investments in sectors outside the traditional oil, gas, and mining enterprises. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Aldo. We're grateful for your interventions. It's important for everyone to know that Aldo is an economist and lawyer with more than 20 years of policy, advocacy, and research experience on a broad array of international, macroeconomic, finance, and sustainable development issues. And of course, as was mentioned before, he is with Jubilee USA Network and was a part of the team that worked on the economic justice section in the paper. We now would like to move back to Mr. Adotei Akwei to see if he has any additional comments around democracy and human rights specifically for a few moments, and then we will move on to our expectations of the Biden-Harris administration, and we will bring on our speaker for that section after just a few more remarks from Mr. Akwei.
Thank you very much, Angelique. I appreciate that. As we said earlier, the recommendations that have been developed were quite numerous, and the working group really tried to highlight, all of the different areas and scope that others on this group have already started to touch on. One of those that I didn't get to mention was basically or I'd like to highlight is addressing violence against women, which of course preceded but has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic, and the International Violence Against Women Act which needs to be reintroduced and passed, should be a priority for the administration. We've also spoken about trying to address the issue of US arms sales, but I'd like to make that a little bit more explicit. Many of you or the public should know that the United States is the world's largest arms manufacturer and exporter globally, and its role in an unregulated and irresponsible global arms trade contributes greatly to conflicts not only in Africa but around the world. And having the United States rejoin the Arms Trade Treaty has also got to be mirrored by more robust oversight and enforcement and of human rights criteria in US arms sales, so that US weapons are not going to regimes that have a proven and documented track record of using those to commit human rights abuses. I think the sort of final point I would touch on would be the importance of civic space. We as a group didn't want to highlight specific countries because our recommendations would have run out of time, but we do believe that trying to change the dynamic between African governments and African civil society is one of the key areas where the United States and the Biden administration can play a role. Being an independent journalist or being an organization that investigates or expresses concerns about government policies should not be equated with treason or insurrection or a political challenge. And I think that that kind of framing has got to be one of the things that the administration should highlight. So I'll stop there, and thank you very much for giving me additional time.
And thank you for your additional comments specific to democracy and human rights. We would like to move now to a response relative to the expectations of the Biden-Harris administration. We are delighted to bring Ms. Imani Countess. Ms. Imani Countess is known for her expertise in U.S.-Africa foreign policy, and she will bring her insights relative to the recommendations and any other observations she feels are relevant for this moment of reflection. So Ms. Countess, Imani, if you're there, thank you.
I'm here. Good morning. A special thank you to the organizers of this webinar. Really appreciate the invitation to share my thoughts regarding our sort of collective expectations of the Biden-Harris administration. In addition to thanking the organizers of the webinar, I really also want to thank the larger AdNA family, individuals, representatives of international non-governmental organizations, US non-governmental organizations, scholars, members of the philanthropic community, faith-based denominations, and human rights activists and issue specialists. Thank you for all that you do. Historically, AdNA has been somewhat unique in its approach because AdNA does not speak for Africa. Instead, it has sought to amplify African voices. The previous presenters have shared highlights of the recommendation document. I won't reiterate them. I do want to highlight the fact that the recommendations are framed by, first and foremost, rights-based approaches. Human, worker, women, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights. Also, there's clear recognition of the importance of working with international institutions, from the World Health Organization to the international financial institutions, but not only engagement with those institutions, but support for Africa's voice within those engagements. And almost all the recommendations reflect African voices within institutions. So of course, the African Union, but also voices within the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the UN on Trade and Development, as well as our partner institutions in Africa. There are many in the incoming Biden administration that support these approaches. However, in the administration and within the broader foreign policy community, there are many who believe that this is the time for American leadership. And President Biden himself has asserted that America is back and ready to lead the world. Well, I don't think so. This is a time for American partnership, a time to listen to other nations, to walk with other nations, while upholding rights-based strategies. And when considering all the tools of foreign policy toward Africa and assistance, relationship with the international financial institutions and the UN and its global agencies, this is a time to act with boldness and clarity while guided by the knowledge the best policies emerge from the understanding that we have common struggles and that if we work in partnership, we can achieve our common goals. Today, the US and nations worldwide are facing multiple crises, specifically the COVID pandemic, racial and ethnic injustice, massive economic inequality within and amongst countries, and a global climate crisis. While these serious existential threats to life exist, there is also enormous opportunity to reimagine and construct anew. So again, I don't think it's time to assert American leadership. No, this is the time for the United States to understand how to play in the sandbox and to model to others in the world what true partnership looks like. We know from both Republican and Democratic administrations, we know where the status quo policies come from and what they lead to. Where I've seen policies rooted in the deadly intersection of structural racism, militarism, and narrow concepts of national security interests based upon the notion of US exceptionalism. We don't need to go back to the days of the US being in charge, because it is. In fact, today on the economic front, the US accounts for 1/7 of the world's gross domestic product. The EU is nearly equal to the US. China's GDP, is larger. On the moral front, the New York Times recently reported that America's 9/11 war displaced 37 million people. And even before Donald Trump entered the White House, the US had refused to ratify international treaties that ban landmines, cluster bombs, and nuclear tests, regulate the global sale of arms, protect the oceans, enable prosecution of genocide and war crimes, and safeguard the rights of women, children, and people with disabilities. Most countries on earth have ratified all or nearly all these agreements. The United States is the only country that has rejected every one. It's also become really clear that in the last 4 years, the world has moved on with or without the United States. And in that same New York Times article that I referenced, they reported on a September 2020 survey that asked Americans whether they preferred the United States to play a dominant or a shared leadership role. Shared prevailed, almost 3-1. So the world doesn't need to be led. Americans want the United States rather to share. And the economic reality reinforces the fact that we are in a multipolar world. Pauline opened earlier by saying that we can now breathe easy. I think we can breathe easier, but we have to be vigilant, and we've got lots of work to do. The current conditions call for policies that are shaped by partnership. The current conditions present the opportunity to build upon successful past programs, for example, PEPFAR and the US support for the Ebola response. Last August, several of us around this virtual table learned about a call that the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa made to his counterpart in Zimbabwe, where he requested that the US that Zimbabwe deploy troops to Cabo Delgado province in northern Mozambique, where insurgents had killed hundreds and displaced tens of thousands. So now why would the US make that call? Not to protect people, but to protect interests. Mozambique sits on some of the world's largest oil and natural gas fields. What would a people-centered approach look like? What would a partnership approach look like? Rather than a transactional engagement with a country known for massive human rights violations and grand corruption, a people-centered approach would support an investigation into the root causes of the conflict, facilitate dialogue with all parties, and encourage resolution of these root causes, which are largely based upon unequal access to resources. The narrow concept of interest of the US as the global leader, it doesn't work. And frankly, I don't think it's ever worked in Africa, regardless of the administration. In this moment of multiple crises, our expectations must be support for policies that are human-centered, tackle difficult structural issues, and that emanate from the understanding that we have common problems that can only be engaged collectively, as opposed to policies that are made within sort of the policymaking bubbles where structural racism and narrow national interest intersect. Some of the rhetoric and the new hires signal such a shift, but the administration's stated emphasis on a return to US leadership fundamentally contradicts partnership and human-centered approaches to policymaking. The US can't solve a climate crisis with a national sort of view of national interest, can't address conflict, immigration, displaced people, sustainable economic development, fair trade from a narrow perspective of US exceptionalism. We need a shift. We need a shift of value structures that center the bonds of common humanity that tie us all together. That shift is reflected in the AdNA recommendations. And it will be our task, I think, to continue to try to help the administration understand the importance of centering these values. And with that, I want to close out. And I, again, really thank the organizers for the invitation to be part of this conversation.
Imani, thank you very much. Thank you for both the complimentary and the critical lens that you have brought to all of the discussion, and very much for affirming the role of AdNA in being an advocate with, not for, but with Africans and Africans in diaspora, a people-centered approach and a values-centered approach. I believe that all of us agree that those approaches are critical in terms of how we move forward in the future. I will add that in the chat that we have those who have responded in kind with that kind of approach. There's a quote in the chat that says, "We don't need the US to go back to the times where it was in charge." This is important. US leadership has to work together with our partners around the world, and that particularly is germane to Africa. We have other questions in the chat. I don't know that we have a lot of time to address all of them, but I want to applaud all of the contributors for staying within our time constraints. We actually do have the 20 minutes we planned for the questions to be considered and for the discussion to ensue. The way we want to approach this is I have identified 4 different questions in the chat. I know that I have partners who are also looking throughout the chat and through the Q&A of any other questions that may emerge, and they'll be sent to me as well. But I do want to begin with what it is that I know to begin the conversation. We had several interventions in the chat around the issues around climate justice. And so I want to put my colleague, Dr. Pauline Muchina, Ms. Emira Woods, on notice that she will be speaking into that moment. There were several around climate justice. But now I want to begin, and I think I will turn this question over to Adotei. This first question that came out initially, of what do you think about the situation in Southern Cameroon with the ongoing crisis? Does U.S. just condemn the abuse? What actions can be taken to stop the dictator crimes against people? The writer also says we are between 5,000 to 12,000 deaths. Of course, you may know more, but I want to turn that question over to Adotei for his brief response. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelique. I think the writer has highlighted one of the most serious crises that is facing the continent, and that is, of course, the situation in Cameroon. Cameroon is facing armed insurgency in the far north from Boko Haram. It has got armed separatist groups in what is known as the Anglophone region, and it's also got a huge number of displaced persons and refugees who have fled conflict next door in the Central African Republic. Even worse, the 35-year rule of Paul Biya has resulted in a culture of impunity and abuse by the Cameroonian security forces. And the documentation of their involvement in torture, extrajudicial killings, and abuses is all over social media, and it's actually verified by not only human rights groups like Amnesty, but also by the Department of State. Though this country needs to be in the spotlight and to be a priority for the global community through the auspices of the United Nations or and the African Union, but something needs to be done urgently to address this tragedy. And I think that the Biden administration will hear this because this diaspora has been extremely active. There was a resolution that was passed by Senators Risch and Cardin at the end of last year, and there have been several resolutions passed in the House of Representatives in the last session of Congress. So I think that I am more hopeful of US engagement, and I hope that that engagement will be focused on addressing the humanitarian crisis, trying to de-escalate the levels of violence, but also trying to help activists and partners figure out a way out of this crisis, which has got political roots.
Thank you very much, Adotei, and for being abbreviated in your response. There are a few other questions we want to get in. This will come to Ms. Woods, to Emira. This is a question from a question in the chat. What thoughts would you share on climate justice and the issue of water, potable water issues, water as a growing factor for increased conflicts on the continent? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question and for all who've taken time really to join in the dialogue today. I think we want to first underscore with climate change the disproportionate impact of the harm of climate chaos on communities of color, both on the African continent and throughout the world. There is this nexus of racism and economic inequality and climate chaos. So our communities are paying the price for an addiction, a global addiction to fossil fuels, driven by the wealthy countries around this planet. So when it comes to all of the underlying issues, access to clean water, access to farmable land, it is those issues that are all impacted by this fossil fuel extraction and the harm that it's causing. So we see this disproportionate impact on our communities, particularly on the African continent, but quite frankly, also here in the US. This was one of the issues discussed by the working group on climate change, that we have to recognize on both sides of the Atlantic that there is harm being done. And so access to all of these building blocks of healthy societies, clean water, it will be the pressure from communities saying we've had enough, saying no to corporate exploitation on their lands, saying and demanding their right to clean water as a basic for good health. So what we're seeing is this kind of interwoven complexity, as Imani so beautifully said, of race, of inequality, and injustice. And so recognizing that access to water is a right that everyone should have across the planet will only happen if we pay attention to issues of mitigating the harmful impacts of climate change, of fighting for climate justice, where those communities that are pushed to the brink are able to amplify their power to actually push back against those that are causing harm to their land, to their water, to their dignity.
Mark, I would like to
Very
add
much,
one thing to
Amara.
what he
Yes,
he
very
asked.
briefly. Thank you.
Yeah. The U.S. government does have a program and through USAID to provide funds for clean water and sanitation. I would like to, at some point, hear from people on the continent how those programs work in context of what Emira said about the broader picture. So we will continue to push for funding for clean water and sanitation on the continent.
Thanks so much, Mark, and thank you, Amara, as well for your responses. I want to move quickly to the next question that is before us, and that is the question relative to COVID-19. And Dr. Machina, I'm putting you on notice. The question is, could not agree more with the comments that have been made. But how will there be a treatment of the priority by the United States government using COVID responses as a springboard to the issues that you have named? How do you see this as a priority relative, particularly to Africa?
Thank you very much. I think we all know the economic impact that COVID has caused in the world. But we also know that we've lost so many people, so many lives to COVID. COVID is going to cause more devastation if something isn't done urgently. That's why the vaccines are very, very important. And to know that we are a global village, so you can't just provide vaccines in the United States and not provide them elsewhere in the world. So it is a launching pad for other issues, such that you cannot just identify COVID in isolation. We need to look at health infrastructure. We need to look at debt cancellation and economic empowerment. We need to look at safety or security, because the more people are displaced from their homes, the more vulnerable they become to COVID infection and other communicable diseases. Yes, it's a launching pad also for US to show partnership rather than, this, we know it all. And there is lessons to be learned from other countries by the United States. Look at what is happening here. More deaths, more infections. So what can the US learn from other countries, in particular African countries? And yes, this is making it very clear that Africa cannot depend on external exports for medical products, for medicines, for vaccines. Therefore, the United States, if it really means being in solidarity with African countries, then it needs to show solidarity by investing in helping African countries to develop these systems that will help them overcome these diseases, and not only COVID, but others as well.
Thank you very much, Dr. Machina. We're very pleased and privileged that the co-convener of Africa and Africans in Diaspora Manchester Conference movement is with us. He is from South Africa, is the Reverend Dr. Frank Chikane, and I'm going to invite him to ask a question and give an intervention at this time very briefly. Reverend Chikane, please. Reverend Chikane, are you still there? Well, it looks like we may have lost him. I apologize. Maybe we'll come back to him.
Angelique, can I just, I just wanted to mention one thing I forgot during the question on Cameroon.
Yes.
That AdNA does have a Cameroon working group. It's led by our good friend Effie Tembon, and that they have been incredibly active, not only in advocacy to Congress around the Rice-Carden resolution, but also have been doing outreach to other Cameroonian diaspora and other parts of the world. That's the kind of energy that we're expecting that this diaspora to bring to this crisis in Cameroon. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Adotei. I don't know if Reverend Chikani is able to open his mic or not. Reverend Chikani, are you there? Reverend Dr. Chikani, are you there from South Africa? I see him lit up, but I don't hear his microphone open. So I'm going to move on to the next question, and hopefully he will be able to do so before the 12 o'clock hour. So there is
Angelique, you're muted.
Thank you very much. I apologize. Okay, so there is one more last question. Hopefully Reverend Chikani will be able to open his mic before the end of the time together. We have about 10 minutes left. But here is the question, and I'm sorry, Adotei, you and possibly Nee might want to comment on this question. Just to flag that for Africa, economic, social, and cultural rights have the same value and status as civil and political rights. One cannot be achieved without the other set of rights. What would be your reflections? And this comes from Ghana, from Azan Akalogo.
I think I'll let my elder brother Nee start us off if he's there. Nee, are you there?
Nee, are you there?
Okay.
Okay.
Well, hopefully Nee will join in. I think Zan made a very important comment. I think historically, we all know that ESCR rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, have been second tier here in the United States, or at least considered second tier, and actually in some cases have been actively resisted as rights by different more conservative parts of the country and different conservative administrations. I think that there's no question you can't have one without the other. And I think that the COVID crisis has basically, if that's not a wake-up call about how you need to address both at the same time, or to prioritize the social services, healthcare services, the treatment and access, as Pauline mentioned, to vaccines and to other pandemics and issues, that eventually the global community is entirely at risk and all of the other rights become vulnerable. And so we're hoping that that the pandemic will lead to a much more equitable focus here by the administration as well as by Congress, to really sort of understand that social services and economic rights not only are needed to be prioritized for addressing to be addressed in Africa, but they also impact what happens here in the United States. And hopefully that will continue beyond this immediate crisis. And I think Emira also highlighted that in her comments about climate justice. Those two are so integrally linked there. The ability to address climate challenges, but also the ability to talk and demand policy. You can't have one without the other. And so I think that Azan is right, that that's got to be a priority, not only for groups like coalitions like AdNA, but also for governments also.
Thank you very much, Adotei. I regret that he wasn't able to join you, but maybe at a later time. I'm going to invite Reverend Chikani once more to be able to join us. I think he may be available now to give a brief intervention at this time. Reverend Chikani, are you available now?
Can you unmute yourself? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, now we can hear you. Go ahead.
You can now hear me. Thank you very much. I must say I'm encouraged about this webinar. I've been with you from the beginning, and I'm hoping that there will be a change in the approach of the United States about Africa. But on the issue of health you were raising, Angelique, the concerns here, the concern on the continent, besides the issues of the facilities, capacity, etc., it's the fact that vaccines seems to be hoarded and kept away, and it's a huge struggle to gain access to them. And I think that's a critical matter. I mean, the vaccines that are becoming available are only coming quite late, and you have to scramble to reach out to the entities that have them. So I hope that your group, in terms of policy, would make sure the vaccines become the vaccines of the world rather than be nationalized. Secondly, that those who are poorer, should be able to get them irrespective. And I think that's really what I would like to say for now within the short time we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Chikani. Again, he's the co-convener for the Africans and Diaspora Manchester Conference. I have the honor of working with him as well. I'm going to turn over to Dr. Muchina to speak into this moment as a response to Reverend Chikani, and then we're going to wrap up our time together.
Reverend Chikani, you have put it correctly that we need to put vaccines accessible to all globally. That's why we are calling on the US government, the current administration, to fund projects like COVAX that have actually been created to make sure that vaccines gets to everybody who needs them, rather than rich country and Western countries hoarding those vaccines. I think it will take time, as you can see, even the countries themselves that, you know, are hoarding these vaccines haven't successfully distributed them to everybody they need to. And there is an issue of access even for people of color to these vaccines in places like United States. So, but African countries, South American countries, Caribbean countries, Asian countries, they have a right to access these vaccines just like anybody else in the world. The issue is the pharmaceutical companies that are making them are trying to make a profit, a larger profit by selling it to African countries. That should be condemned, and we are calling on this government to really condemn that issue. And the second part actually that needs to be emphasized is that they can actually take away their patenting so that these vaccines can be produced locally. We have institutions in the continent that can easily reproduce these vaccines if the patenting were reduced. But these companies, even though they know that they can share the technology, are refusing to do that. So we are calling upon the US government to make sure that this company, and some of them are funded by governments such as the United States and European countries, they need to say, you need to share this technology, you need to remove this patenting so that we can have them accessible. And as we've been saying all along, that if you think that if you immunize all of United States and think that you are safe while the rest of the world is not immunized or has gotten vaccines, you're lying to yourself. We are a global village. You know, where did this disease start? How did it spread around the world? You know, so let's do the right thing. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Muchina. I would like to wrap up with one last question, if you allow me, just 2 or 3 minutes over time. I think this question is important. I'm going to send it to Ms. Imani Countess to wrap up with this last question. How do we join forces? This is from Albert Guyan. How do we join forces with progressive groups on the continent to advocate governments to invest the scarce resources in proper nutrition, safe drinking water, appropriate sanitation, and adequate shelter for all? Ms. Countess, please.
Well, I would throw that question back to Albert, but because I think he's probably got really great ideas to address that question. You know, I think that we can always do better, but I do really feel like AdNA is a good representation of how we do that. Every one of us around this virtual table that's based in the United States, we have a relationship with organizations, with individuals, with institutions in Africa. And as I said in my brief remarks, you know, I don't speak for Africa, right? I simply reiterate the kinds of recommendations and policy suggestions that people tell me, right? And I think the same holds for many of you around this table. A number of us, so that's the first link, the fact that we're here, but we have links. And then the other reality is that there are a number of people around this table that are already part of global networks, right? So for example, the Jubilee Network is part of a global social movement that has been advocating for debt relief, debt cancellation, and so forth. So lifting up and participating in those global networks is also really very, very important. And in terms of how we come together to impact governments, you know, I think we continue to do what we have been doing. We produce smart policy recommendations. We share those. We use any number of tools, tactics, and strategies to carry out advocacy work. Some of that, you know, can be as simple as a conversation with congressional staff, and that can have an impact. And then other times, you know, we're out in the streets, or we're in the boardrooms, or we're really kind of calling people out. Again, a variety of tactics and strategies. But I think, you know, we've got the fundamentals here, and we build upon what we have, and we do the kinds of things that we know in terms of advocacy that we know have been successful in the past. But definitely we have to keep the struggle on. You know, again, Pauline, where are you? We are all breathing, you know, we're breathing, right? Because for a long time, I felt like I was holding my breath, right?
I am with you on that.
and so we're breathing easier, but we've got a lot of work to do.
So
we've
true.
got to take this opportunity and move it forward.
Thank you so much, Imani. Really appreciate the insights. I just want to take this moment to give thanks to everyone who has contributed in this process. I think it's been substantial. I think it's impactful. I like to think everyone has benefited from this time together. I know I have. We are grateful. And so to all of our partners who have brought us this webinar together, who have brought this webinar together for us on this day, we give thanks. I do want to alert you that AdNA will have other webinars this year. And so if you don't mind, we'd like to put you on our list to invite you back as we go forward. We appreciate the questions, and we certainly appreciate the responses. Let us live in hope and possibilities in the midst of the crises that we've named for the future. We thank you, God bless you, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Angelique.
Thank you. God bless everyone.